My daughter told 180 wedding guests that I killed her mother. Not directly, but Caroline stood at that podium in her $15,000 dress and said I was a pathetic failure who let Mom die because I was too broke to save her. That Mom died ashamed of the man she married, that she was grateful her new husband's family had real money, unlike her disappointing father. Every word was a lie. I sat in the back corner, table 12, watching her destroy 8 years of my silence. The Sterlings nodded along. Their hedge fund friends smirked. Nobody looked at the broken widower. I took a slow sip of my water, set the glass down carefully, because Caroline had no idea I had $33 million in my Chase account. She was about to find out why you never humiliate the quiet guy in the corner. Trust me, you want to see what happens next. Let me tell you how we got here, how my own daughter became someone who could weaponize her mother's death for social points. My name is Matt Thompson. I'm 62 years old. For 30 years, I was a military contractor, specializing in classified defense systems. The kind of work that paid extremely well, but required top-secret clearance and complete discretion about your wealth. My wife Margaret and I raised Caroline in a modest 3-bedroom house in Stamford, Connecticut. We drove used cars, shopped at Target, took vacations to the Jersey Shore instead of Europe. Not because we couldn't afford better, but because Margaret believed in teaching our daughter the value of money. Don't spoil Caroline with wealth, she'd always say. Let her build character first. Margaret was a kindergarten teacher, 28 years at the same elementary school, making $45,000 a year. She could have quit any time after my defense contracts started bringing in serious money, but she loved those kids, said teaching kept her grounded. Caroline never knew we had money. To her, Dad was just some guy who worked on computer stuff for the government. Mom was a teacher. We were middle class, maybe lower middle class when times got tight. Then in 2014, everything changed. Margaret felt a lump in her breast during a routine self-exam. Stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma. The oncologist said we had maybe 18 months if we stuck with standard treatment. But I wasn't accepting maybe. I liquidated everything, sold my shares in 3 defense startups I'd helped build, cashed out my Pentagon consulting retainer worth $2.3 million annually, burned through every contact I had in military medicine. We tried experimental immunotherapy at Johns Hopkins, $180,000 per treatment cycle. Proton beam radiation at Mass General, $95,000 per session. Clinical trials in Switzerland that cost $40,000 just for the consultation. Caroline watched me write check after check, saw our savings account statements showing massive withdrawals. Watched me sell the house we'd lived in for 15 years to pay for treatments that weren't covered by insurance. Dad's spending everything trying to save Mom, she told her friends. She wasn't wrong. The medical bills totaled $2.1 million over 24 months. Every penny came out of our accounts. But here's what Caroline didn't see. The money flowing back in. 3 months after Margaret's diagnosis, the Pentagon awarded me the largest single contractor cyber defense project in military history. $47.5 million over 5 years, completely classified. Even my family couldn't know the details. 6 months later, one of my defense startups went public. My original stake, which I'd supposedly sold, was actually converted to shares that I couldn't touch until after the IPO lockup period. When the stock hit the market, those shares were worth $31.2 million. A year after that, Northrop Grumman bought out another company I'd helped design security protocols for. My consulting agreement included back-end royalties that triggered when they reached certain revenue milestones. That check was $18.7 million. By the time Margaret entered hospice care in late 2015, I had more money than we'd ever dreamed of. But I couldn't tell her. Couldn't tell Caroline. The Pentagon contracts required complete financial discretion until the projects concluded in 2019. Margaret died on January 15th, 2016. Caroline was 25 years old. At the funeral, she stood up and talked about how Dad had spent everything trying to save Mom, how we'd lost our house and our savings, but at least Mom knew how much Dad loved her. I let her believe it. For 8 years, I let Caroline think we were broke, that her father was a failure who couldn't save her mother despite spending everything he had. She got a job in marketing, making $65,000 a year, moved into a studio apartment in Manhattan that cost $2,800 monthly, started dating guys from finance and consulting who made real money. Meanwhile, I kept living like I was broke. Bought a small condo in Stamford for $180,000 cash, but told Caroline I was renting. Drove a 2012 Honda Civic that I'd owned for years. Shopped at the same Target, ate at the same diners, but every month, Caroline's student loans mysteriously got smaller. Her credit card payments somehow cleared themselves. When she needed a security deposit for a better apartment, an anonymous cashier's check would appear in her mailbox. She never questioned the coincidences. In 2019, she started dating Reginald Sterling, hedge fund analyst from a family that made their fortune in railroad investments 3 generations ago. They owned a 12-bedroom estate in Greenwich, drove matching Range Rovers, and spent their summers in the Hamptons. Caroline was in heaven. Finally, she was dating someone with real class. The Sterlings looked down on me from day one. At family dinners, they'd make comments about Caroline's working-class background and how fortunate she was to be joining their family. Reginald's father, Whitman Sterling Jr., once told me at a Christmas party that he admired how I'd done my best with limited resources. I smiled and thanked him for his understanding, but Caroline had no idea what her mother really said about her in those final weeks. The conversations we had when morphine made Margaret brutally honest about our daughter's character. She was about to find out why you should never assume the quiet person in the corner doesn't have the nuclear option. The wedding was everything Caroline had dreamed of. The Ashworth Estate Country Club in Greenwich, a venue that cost $85,000 just to book for the day. 180 guests, all dressed in designer everything, sipping $200 a bottle champagne. I wore my best suit, a $200 navy blue from Men's Warehouse that I'd owned for 6 years. Caroline had specifically asked me not to embarrass her by trying to rent something expensive. The ceremony was beautiful. Caroline looked radiant in that $15,000 Vera Wang dress. Reginald looked like he'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog in his custom $4,000 tuxedo. I walked her down the aisle, gave her away to the man she loved, smiled when the photographer asked me to look proud of your daughter. I was proud, right up until dinner started. The Sterlings had seated me at table 12, the back corner of the reception hall, next to the kitchen doors. My table mates were Reginald's elderly great-aunt, who was deaf in one ear, and a couple of distant cousins who'd clearly drawn the short straw. Caroline's table was front and center, the head table decorated with $500 worth of white orchids. She sat between Reginald and his father, laughing at their jokes, fitting right in with their crowd. During cocktail hour, I'd overheard conversations. Reginald's Princeton buddies talking about their summer houses in Martha's Vineyard, hedge fund managers comparing their Ferrari collections, investment bankers complaining about their kids' $60,000 a year private school tuitions. One of Reginald's groomsmen asked Caroline how she'd escaped her circumstances. She laughed and said, "Good genes and better taste, I guess." But the real show started when Caroline stood up to give her speech. She tapped her champagne flute with a silver knife. The room went quiet. 180 people turned to look at the beautiful bride in her perfect dress. "Good evening, everyone," Caroline began, her voice carrying across the room. "I want to thank you all for being here on the most important day of my life." Applause, smiles, the usual wedding speech opening. You know, growing up, I never thought I'd end up somewhere like this. Married to an amazing man from such an accomplished family, surrounded by all of you incredible people. More applause. I took a sip of my water. I have to be honest with you all. My childhood wasn't easy. My father, and she paused and looked directly at me. My father tried his best, but he never really amounted to anything. The room got quieter, a few uncomfortable glances toward my table. After my mother died, he became, well, let's just say the grief didn't bring out his best qualities. He kind of gave up on life, on success, on trying to provide for his family. I set my water glass down carefully, folded my hands in my lap. I'm not proud to say this, but there were times I was embarrassed by his limitations, his working-class background, the way he settled for mediocrity instead of pushing himself to be better. Reginald's father nodded approvingly. Several Sterling family members exchanged knowing looks. I used to lie awake at night wondering what my mother would think if she could see how far he'd fallen after she died, whether she'd be ashamed of the man she married. That's when something cold settled in my chest. Caroline was using Margaret's memory as a weapon, against me, in front of 180 people. But thankfully, I found Reginald. And through him, I found this family. A family that showed me what real success looks like, what it means to have standards, to achieve something meaningful with your life. She raised her glass toward the Sterling family table. Whitman, Patricia, thank you for welcoming me into your family, for showing me that it's possible to rise above your circumstances, for proving that breeding and class aren't accidents of birth, but choices you make every day. Standing ovation from half the room, the Sterling half. So here's to new beginnings, to leaving the past behind, to finally having a father figure who actually accomplished something with his life. She smiled at Whitman Sterling Jr., who beamed back at her like she'd just handed him a trophy. And here's to my real father, sitting over there at table 12, who did his best with what he had, even if it wasn't very much. A few people actually laughed. Laughed at the pathetic old man in the cheap suit who couldn't even afford a decent table at his own daughter's wedding. Caroline raised her glass one final time, to everyone who helped me become the woman I am today, and to those who showed me exactly what I didn't want to become. She looked straight at me when she said it. The room erupted in applause. Caroline hugged Reginald, kissed her new father-in-law on the cheek, basked in the approval of 180 people who now knew exactly what kind of failure had raised her. I sat there for 30 seconds, listening to the applause die down, watching my daughter glow with pride at having publicly humiliated the man who'd raised her. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, because Caroline had no idea what I was carrying with me, what I'd been saving for 8 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth about everything. She was about to learn that some lessons cost more than others. What I pulled from my jacket wasn't a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. My wife's iPhone, the same rose gold iPhone 7 Plus that Margaret had used during her final weeks in hospice. The phone I'd kept, charged for 8 years, unable to delete the last voice memo she'd recorded 3 days before she died. I'd listened to it exactly once, the night after her funeral. Then I'd locked it away, too painful to hear again, until tonight. I excused myself from table 12, walked past the dessert station, past the bar where Reginald's groomsmen were ordering $50 shots of Macallan, past the photo booth where Caroline was posing with her new family. I found a quiet corner near the coat check, pressed play. Margaret's voice, weak but determined, filled my ear through the phone speaker. Matt, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably thinking about playing the martyr for the rest of your life. Even dying, she knew me too well. I need you to know some things about Caroline. Things I couldn't say while I was alive because I kept hoping she'd grow out of it. I closed my eyes, listening to my dead wife's confession. She's become cruel, Matt. Not just selfish. Cruel. Last week, when the nurse was helping me to the bathroom, Caroline asked when I was finally going to die so you could get back to normal life. Those were her exact words. The words hit like ice water. She told me she was embarrassed to bring friends around because of how pathetic you'd become. She said she wished she'd been born into a different family, a successful family. Margaret's voice got stronger, more urgent. I heard her on the phone with that Sterling boy, Matt. She was laughing about how her working-class father would never fit into their world. She said she was grateful she'd inherited her intelligence from my side of the family, because your genes were clearly limited. I had to pause the recording. My hands were shaking. When I pressed play again, Margaret was crying. I'm scared, Matt. Not of dying, but of what she's becoming. Promise me you won't enable this behavior with money after I'm gone. Promise me you'll make her earn her character the hard way. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And if she ever dishonors my memory to make herself look better, if she ever uses my death as an excuse to hurt you, then you have my permission to tell her exactly what I thought about the woman she was becoming. The recording ended with a timestamp, January 12th, 2016, 11:47 p.m., 3 days before she died. I stood there in that corner for 5 minutes, listening to the wedding reception continue behind me. Caroline's laughter carrying over the music, The Sterling family holding court at their tables, probably still discussing my daughter's inspirational speech about rising above her circumstances. For 8 years, I'd honored Margaret's wishes. I'd let Caroline struggle, let her think we were broke, let her build what I thought was character through adversity. Instead, she'd built resentment. And tonight, she'd crossed the line Margaret had specifically warned me about. She'd dishonored her mother's memory to gain social approval. I walked back into the reception hall, past the dance floor where Caroline was spinning in her $15,000 dress, past the Sterling family table where they were probably planning her integration into their social circle. I sat down at table 12 and opened my phone. Not Margaret's phone, my phone. I had a Chase Bank app that showed my current checking account balance, $33,187,432. I had a Wells Fargo app showing my investment portfolio, $41,293,156. I had photos of my military commendations, including the Defense Superior Service Medal I'd received for the Pentagon Cyber Project. I had screenshots of the property deed showing that I owned the 12-bedroom Sterling family estate in Greenwich. Had owned it since 2009, when I bought it from a bankruptcy auction for $3.2 million. The Sterlings had been renting it from me for $1 a year under a charitable arrangement I'd set up to help them save face after their railroad fortune collapsed. I had email records showing every anonymous payment I'd made toward Caroline's student loans, credit cards, and rent over the past 8 years, $247,000 in total. And I had Margaret's voice recording, time-stamped and saved to the cloud, with her explicit permission to reveal the truth if Caroline ever crossed this exact line. The DJ announced that the father of the bride had requested to make a speech. I hadn't requested anything, but I stood up anyway, because some promises to the dead are more important than keeping peace with the living. I didn't walk straight to that microphone. That would have been sloppy, emotional, the kind of mistake that lets your target escape with their dignity intact. Instead, I went to the bar. "Excuse me," I said to the bartender. "Could I borrow your phone charger? I need to make sure my phone doesn't die during the speeches." He handed me a portable battery pack. I plugged in both phones, Margaret's rose gold iPhone and my Samsung Galaxy, both fully charged now. While they powered up, I opened my email app and forwarded myself a specific message, something I'd received that morning from my accountant, confirming the final details of a decision I'd been considering for months. Then I opened my photos and created a new album. Selected 23 images I'd never shown anyone. Bank statements dating back to 2016. Property deeds with my name as sole owner. Screenshots of every anonymous payment I'd made to Caroline's accounts. Military commendation certificates. The Pentagon contractor identification card I'd carried for 15 years. And one more thing. I opened my voice recorder app and started a new recording, just in case anyone later claimed I'd lost my mind or said things I didn't mean. This is Matt Thompson speaking. Today is September 23rd, 2024. The time is 8:47 p.m. I am of sound mind and clear judgment. What I'm about to do, I do with full knowledge of the consequences, in accordance with my late wife's explicit wishes, and in response to my daughter's public dishonoring of her mother's memory. I stopped the recording and saved it with the timestamp. The DJ was introducing the best man for his speech, Reginald's Princeton roommate, telling charming stories about bachelor parties in Cabo and investment banking bonuses. I used those 10 minutes to prepare my evidence in the exact order I wanted to present it. First, Margaret's voice recording queued up to the most damaging parts. Second, my Chase Bank statement, screenshot cropped to show just the account balance and today's date. Third, the property deed showing my ownership of the Sterling estate, with the $1 per year rental agreement attached. Fourth, a spreadsheet I'd created years ago, tracking every dollar I'd anonymously given Caroline since her mother died. Fifth, my military commendations and Pentagon contractor credentials. Sixth, the email I'd forwarded myself that morning from my estate attorney confirming the changes to my will that would take effect immediately upon my verbal authorization. By the time the best man finished his speech, I had everything arranged. 2 phones, fully charged, evidence sorted, voice recording ready to play through the venue's sound system. The DJ called for the father of the bride. Actually, I heard Caroline's voice over the microphone, my father is a little shy about public speaking. He probably won't want to say anything. Nervous laughter from the Sterling tables. Sympathetic nods from people who assumed the broke, pathetic widower was too intimidated to address such a sophisticated crowd. I stood up. No, Caroline, I think I do have something to say. The room went quiet. 180 people turned to look at the man in the $200 suit walking toward the microphone. Caroline's face went pale. For just a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to apologize when she broke something valuable. But it was too late for apologies. I reached the podium and looked out at the crowd, at the Sterling family in their designer clothes, at Caroline in her $15,000 dress, at all the people who'd just applauded her speech about rising above her pathetic father's limitations. I connected Margaret's phone to the venue's sound system through the auxiliary cable. Then I began to speak. The wedding reception was about to become a courtroom. Good evening, everyone. My voice carried clearly through the room. The microphone was working perfectly. Every person in that reception hall could hear me. I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Caroline and Reginald's wedding. It's been educational. A few polite chuckles. Caroline was gripping her champagne flute so hard I thought it might shatter. You know, I've been sitting at table 12 tonight, listening to all the speeches, hearing about success and accomplishment, about rising above your circumstances and joining families with real breeding and class. I paused and looked directly at Whitman Sterling Jr. It got me thinking about my late wife, Margaret, about what she would have thought of tonight's festivities. Caroline's eyes were darting between me and the exit doors. Reginald had his hand on her shoulder, but he looked confused, like he couldn't quite figure out why his new father-in-law suddenly seemed so calm and confident. Margaret was a wonderful woman, a kindergarten teacher who touched hundreds of young lives during her 28 years in the classroom. She died 8 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Sympathetic murmurs from the crowd. Several people nodded respectfully. Now, during Margaret's illness, we spent everything we had trying to save her life. Every penny. Caroline watched me write check after check to doctors and hospitals. She saw our savings disappear. She witnessed what she believed was her father spending himself into poverty for love. I looked at Caroline again. Her face was white now. And after Margaret died, Caroline believed her father was broke. Finished. A pathetic failure, who'd gambled everything on treatments that didn't work. More nods. People were feeling sorry for me now, the grieving widower who'd lost everything. For 8 years, I let her believe that story. I let her think I was struggling financially, that I was living in a small apartment, driving an old car, shopping at discount stores because I had no choice. Whitman Sterling Jr. was listening intently now. This wasn't going where he'd expected. I let Caroline believe she was dating above her station when she met Reginald, that she was lucky to be accepted into a family with real money and real class. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out both phones. But before I continue, I think you should all hear something, a voice recording that Margaret made 3 days before she died, something she asked me to share if certain circumstances ever arose. Caroline stood up abruptly. Dad, maybe we should... Sit down, Caroline. My voice had changed, still calm but with an edge that made her freeze. You just gave a beautiful speech about your mother dying ashamed of the man she married, about how grateful you are to have found a real father figure in Whitman, about leaving the past behind. I held up Margaret's phone. I think it's only fair that everyone hears what your mother actually said about you in her final days. The room was dead silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. This recording is time-stamped January 12th, 2016, 3 days before Margaret Thompson died. She made it specifically for this moment. Caroline's mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. After you hear your mother's actual words about the daughter she was leaving behind, I have a few other things to share with you all. Things about success and accomplishment, about class and breeding, about exactly who has been rising above their circumstances. I press play on the recording. Margaret's weak but determined voice filled the reception hall through the sound system. Matt, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone, and Caroline has probably crossed the line I warned you about. 180 people went completely silent. The nuclear option had just gone live. Margaret's voice continued through the speakers, clear and unmistakable. She's become cruel. Matt, not just selfish. Cruel. Last week, when the nurse was helping me to the bathroom, Caroline asked when I was finally going to die so you could get back to normal life. Those were her exact words. Gasps from around the room. Caroline's face went from white to green. She told me she was embarrassed to bring friends around because of how pathetic you'd become. She said she wished she'd been born into a different family, a successful family. Several wedding guests turned to stare at Caroline. Reginald's grip on her shoulder tightened. Margaret's voice grew stronger on the recording. I heard her on the phone with that Sterling boy, Matt. She was laughing about how her working-class father would never fit into their world. She said she was grateful she'd inherited her intelligence from my side of the family because your genes were clearly limited. Whitman Sterling Jr.'s face darkened. He was staring at Caroline now, not me. I'm scared, Matt. Not of dying, but of what she's becoming. Promise me you won't enable this behavior with money after I'm gone. Promise me you'll make her earn her character the hard way. The recording paused. I looked out at 180 silent faces. That was your mother's dying wish, Caroline. That I not spoil you with money. That I let you build character through struggle. I held up my phone now, showing the screen to the room. For 8 years, I honored that wish. I let you believe we were broke. I watched you work for everything. I hoped you'd develop empathy, humility, the qualities your mother valued. Caroline tried to speak. Dad, I'm not finished. My voice cut through her attempt like a blade. Instead, you became exactly what your mother feared. Someone who values wealth over character. Someone who would dishonor the dead for social approval. I opened my Chase Bank app and held the phone up high enough for the front tables to see. So let me share a few facts with everyone here tonight. Facts about success and accomplishment. I read directly from the screen. My current checking account balance is $33,187,432. The silence was absolute. No one even breathed. My investment portfolio, managed by Goldman Sachs, is worth $41,293,000. Whitman Sterling Jr. was gripping his wine glass so hard his knuckles were white. I pulled out a printed document from my jacket. This is my military service record. I held top-secret clearance for 15 years as a Pentagon contractor specializing in cyber defense systems. The project I completed in 2019 was the largest single contractor award in military history. $47.5 million. Several people at the Sterling family table were now staring at their plates. But my favorite document is this one. I held up another paper. This is the property deed for the estate at 247 Meadowbrook Lane in Greenwich, Connecticut. Some of you might recognize that address. Whitman Sterling Jr. went completely pale. It's the Sterling family's ancestral home, the 12-bedroom mansion where they've lived for 4 generations, except they don't own it. I looked directly at Whitman. I do. I bought it in 2009 when your railroad fortune collapsed and you faced bankruptcy. You've been renting it from me for $1 per year under a charitable arrangement designed to help you save face. Patricia Sterling made a choking sound. The property is currently valued at $8.2 million. The taxes, which I pay, are $63,000 annually. The maintenance, which I cover, runs about $40,000 per year. I turned back to Caroline. Would you like to know what else I've been paying for? She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I pulled out my phone again and opened a spreadsheet. Your student loan payments. Anonymous cashier's checks totaling $87,000 over 6 years. Your credit card payments when you max them out. $43,000. Your apartment security deposits and rent assistance. $91,000. Your car payments, insurance, and maintenance for that BMW X5 you drive. $26,000. Total anonymous financial assistance to Caroline Thompson over 8 years. $247,000. The numbers hung in the air like accusations. Every month, I watched you struggle just enough to think you were earning your way. Every month, I made sure you never actually failed. And every month, I hoped you'd develop the character your mother wanted you to have. I paused and looked around the room. Instead, you stood at this podium tonight and told 180 people that your mother died ashamed of me, that I was a pathetic failure who never amounted to anything. My voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the microphone carried every word. Your mother didn't die ashamed of me, Caroline. She died worried about you. Caroline was sobbing openly now. Reginald looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, but I wasn't done. I pulled out one final document. This morning I met with my estate attorney. This is a revised will, executed and notarized as of 3:30 p.m. today. I held the document up for everyone to see. My previous will left everything to Caroline. My houses, my investments, my military pension, everything. Approximately $74 million. Caroline looked up through her tears, hope flickering in her eyes. My new will leaves Caroline exactly $1, the same amount her in-laws pay in rent. The hope died. The rest goes to the American Cancer Society in memory of Margaret Thompson, a woman who valued character over wealth and kindness over class. I folded the will and put it back in my jacket. The changes take effect immediately upon my verbal authorization, which I'm giving right now in front of all these witnesses. I looked at Caroline one last time. Congratulations on your wedding, sweetheart. You finally got what you always wanted, a family with real money and real class. I gestured toward the Sterling table, where Whitman Jr. was staring at his wine glass like it contained poison. Of course, now that you know who actually owns their house, things might be a little awkward at Thanksgiving. I disconnected Margaret's phone from the sound system and picked up both devices. Enjoy the rest of your reception, everyone. The bar's already paid for. I walked away from the microphone, leaving my daughter's new life in ruins behind me. I made it exactly 15 feet from the microphone before the chaos started. Caroline's scream cut through the silence like a knife. Not a sob or a cry, but a full-throated scream of pure anguish that made half the room flinch. You can't do this. You can't just destroy my life. She was on her feet now, her $15,000 dress wrinkled from gripping the fabric, mascara streaming down her cheeks in black rivers. 30 years! 30 years I've been your daughter, and you destroy me in front of everyone. I turned back toward her, my voice calm. 8 years, Caroline. 8 years you let me believe your mother died ashamed of me. I never said that. I pulled out Margaret's phone again. Would you like me to play the recording again? I have the exact timestamp where your mother quotes your words about her dying ashamed. Caroline's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. That's when Reginald found his voice. Now wait just a minute. He stood up, his face flushed red with rage or embarrassment or both. You can't come to our wedding and humiliate my wife with some fabricated recording. Fabricated? I opened the voice recording app on my phone and showed him the timestamp and file properties. January 12th, 2016, 11:47 p.m. Original iPhone audio file, never edited. I can provide the digital signature and metadata to any forensics expert you'd like to hire. Reginald's father, Whitman Sterling Jr., finally stood up. His hands were shaking. The property deed. That has to be forged. Our family has owned that estate since 1924. I pulled out my phone and opened the Connecticut Property Records app. Would you like me to show everyone the public records? Property transfers are public information, Whitman. Your bankruptcy filing in 2009 is also public record. Should I pull that up too? His face went from red to gray in seconds. You son of a bitch, he whispered. Actually, my mother was a saint. Unlike some people in this room, that's when Patricia Sterling, Whitman's wife, started crying. Not quiet tears, but body-shaking sobs that drew every eye in the room. 40 years, she wailed. 40 years we've been telling everyone about our family estate, our heritage, our legacy. She looked around at the other society families, most of whom were now staring at their phones, probably Googling the property records to verify my claims. We're ruined. Completely ruined. Meanwhile, Caroline had found her second wind. All those anonymous payments. You were spying on me, stalking my finances. I was helping you, Caroline, every month for 8 years. I didn't ask for your help. No, you just cashed the checks. Several wedding guests were now openly taking photos and videos with their phones. I could see at least 6 people live streaming to Instagram and TikTok. One of Reginald's groomsmen, a hedge fund analyst named Brandon, was the first to break ranks. Dude, your father-in-law owns your house? That's actually hilarious. Shut up, Brandon. Reginald snarled. No, seriously, this is like a Netflix documentary in real time. The broke dad who's secretly richer than all of us combined. Brandon held up his phone, filming everything. This is going to be everywhere by midnight. That's when I noticed something interesting happening at the other tables. The non-sterling guests, the people who weren't part of the old money crowd, were starting to smile. A woman at table 6 stood up and started clapping. Then table 3 joined in. Within 30 seconds, about half the reception hall was applauding. The half that wasn't related to either family and had just watched the ultimate underdog victory. The Sterling family members looked mortified. Their friends from the yacht club and country club were frantically texting, probably trying to figure out how quickly they could distance themselves from this social catastrophe. Caroline noticed the applause and completely lost what was left of her composure. Stop clapping! This isn't funny. He just destroyed my entire family. She turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. I hope you're happy, Dad. I hope this was worth it. It was, Caroline. My voice was still calm, still controlled. Your mother made me promise to set boundaries if you ever crossed certain lines. Tonight you crossed the biggest one. What line? Using her memory as a weapon against the man who loved her most. That shut her up. Reginald was now on his phone, probably calling lawyers or financial advisors or both. Whitman Sterling Jr. had collapsed back into his chair and was staring at nothing. Patricia Sterling was still crying into her napkin. The DJ, clearly out of his depth with this situation, made the mistake of asking if anyone wanted to request a song. Brandon, the hedge fund groomsman, shouted out, "Play Money Can't Buy Me Love by the Beatles." Half the room laughed. Caroline screamed again. I decided it was time to leave. I walked toward the exit, past tables full of people who were either applauding, filming, or sitting in stunned silence. As I reached the door, Caroline's voice rang out one last time. Don't you dare walk away from me! We're not done. I turned back and looked at her across the reception hall. My daughter in her beautiful dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her new family's reputation. Yes, Caroline, we are. And I walked out into the Connecticut night, leaving behind 8 years of silence and 33 years of fatherhood. The valet brought me my 2012 Honda Civic. I tipped him $20 and drove home to my small condo. But the real consequences were just beginning. I thought I was done. I thought walking out of that reception hall was the end of it. I was wrong. At 11:30 p.m., my phone rang. Caroline, Dad, please, we need to talk. Her voice was different now, smaller. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like the little girl I'd raised. There's nothing left to talk about, Caroline. Please, just 5 minutes. I'm in the parking lot of your condo complex. I looked out my window. Sure enough, there was a black BMW X5 parked under the streetlight, the one I'd been making payments on for 3 years. Against my better judgment, I went downstairs. Caroline was leaning against the car, still in her wedding dress. Her makeup was gone, her hair was falling out of its elaborate style, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 hours. The reception ended at 9:45, she said without looking at me. Half the guests left after your speech. The other half stayed to film the Sterling family meltdown. I didn't respond. Reginald's parents are talking about annulment. They're saying I committed fraud by not disclosing my family's true financial status. Like being rich is something you have to warn people about. She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. You want to know the really funny part? Reginald is more angry about the money than the humiliation. He spent 2 years telling his friends he was marrying down for love. Turns out he was marrying up the whole time. Caroline, no, let me finish. She finally looked at me, and I saw Margaret in her eyes for the first time in 8 years. I listened to Mum's recording again. Reginald filmed your whole speech on his phone. I've watched it 6 times now. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. She was right about me, wasn't she? About what I was becoming. For a moment I felt hope. Maybe this was the breakthrough Margaret had wanted. Maybe losing everything would finally teach Caroline the lessons that wealth couldn't. But then her expression hardened. But that doesn't make what you did tonight okay. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. You destroyed my marriage before it even started. You made me look like a fool. You made yourself look like a fool, Caroline. I just provided the evidence. Evidence you gathered by lying to me for 8 years. Her voice was rising again. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to my career? To my social life? By tomorrow morning, everyone in Greenwich is going to know that Caroline Thompson's father owns the Sterling estate, that everything I've built for myself was funded by anonymous daddy money. Maybe that's something you should have considered before you gave that speech. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to show them I belonged. By throwing your mother's memory under the bus? That stopped her cold. We stood there in silence for 30 seconds. The only sound was a distant police siren somewhere in Stamford. Finally, Caroline spoke again, and her voice was ice cold. I want you to know that I will never forgive you for this. Never. I understand. I'm going to contest the will. I'm going to hire the best lawyers in Connecticut and prove you were mentally incompetent when you changed it. The will was reviewed by 3 different attorneys and a psychiatrist, Caroline, all of whom will testify that I was completely rational and acting on specific triggering events that were predetermined years ago. Her face fell as she realized I'd planned for that contingency too. You really thought of everything, didn't you? Your mother and I discussed this scenario extensively before she died. We both hoped it would never happen. Caroline stared at me for a long moment. Then she got back in her BMW. But before she drove away, she rolled down the window. You know what the worst part is, Dad? I actually loved you. Despite everything, despite being embarrassed by you, despite thinking you were a failure, I still loved you. She put the car in drive. But after tonight, you're dead to me, just like Mom. The BMW disappeared into the night, leaving me standing alone under a streetlight in a nearly empty parking lot. I went back upstairs to my small condo, made myself a cup of coffee, sat in my recliner and thought about Margaret, about the promise I'd made to her 8 years ago, about the choice between enabling Caroline's cruelty and honoring a dead woman's final wishes. At 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a news alert. Wedding reception revenge goes viral. Daughter humiliates broke father. Discovers he's millionaire who owns her in-laws' estate. The story had already been picked up by 3 Connecticut news stations and was trending on Twitter under #WeddingRevenge. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Some lessons are worth $74 million. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my financial advisor's office, signing the final paperwork for the largest charitable donation in Connecticut cancer research history. $73.9 million to the American Cancer Society in memory of Margaret Thompson. The remaining $100,000 goes to me, enough to live comfortably in my small condo for the rest of my life. Are you absolutely certain about this, Matt? My advisor asks. This is irreversible. I've never been more certain of anything. The news coverage died down after about 2 weeks, but the social consequences for the Sterling family lasted much longer. Whitman Sterling Jr. lost his membership at 3 different country clubs. Patricia Sterling's bridge club quietly asked her to step down from the charity board she'd chaired for 12 years. Reginald filed for annulment exactly 37 days after the wedding, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of family financial status. Caroline didn't contest it. Hard to argue fraud when the entire confrontation was recorded and posted on YouTube. The video now has 2.3 million views. Caroline moved to Portland, Oregon, got a job with a small marketing firm that probably didn't Google her name before hiring her. She changed her social media accounts to private and deleted most of her photos from the wedding. She's never contacted me again. The Sterling family still lives in my house. I haven't raised their rent from $1 per year. Patricia Sterling sent me a handwritten note 3 months ago, apologizing for their treatment of me and asking if we could find a way forward. I haven't responded. Some people say I went too far. That public humiliation was cruel, no matter what Caroline had done. That destroying a family over one night of poor judgment was an overreaction. Those people never heard Margaret's voice recording. They never watched their child use their spouse's death as a social climbing tool. They never spent 8 years honoring a dying woman's wishes, only to have those wishes spat on for the entertainment of 180 strangers. I sleep well at night. The Cancer Research Foundation sends me quarterly reports on how the money is being used. Clinical trials for new treatments, support programs for families like mine who watch someone they love fight an unwinnable war. Last month, they sent me a photo from their latest fundraising gala. The banner read, "The Margaret Thompson Memorial Research Wing." Margaret would have loved that. She always said the best revenge against death was helping others live. I keep her rose gold iPhone charged on my nightstand. Sometimes, late at night, I play her voice memos. Not the one from her final weeks, but the happy ones. The ones where she's laughing with Caroline after school. The ones where she's planning Caroline's future. She never got to see how that future turned out. Maybe that's for the best. If you enjoyed this story, there are more like it in my playlist. Sometimes the quiet person in the corner has more power than anyone realizes. And sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones worth learning.